The night sky was clear, the stars sharp and scattered, like glittering diamonds. It was just another peaceful evening on Earth, but something extraordinary was about to happen. In a quiet corner of the world, a young scientist named Elara sat in her observatory, peering through the lenses of a telescope. She'd spent countless nights observing the cosmos, but tonight, the patterns were different. Her eyes widened as she studied a strange anomaly in the heavens. It wasn't a star, it wasn't a comet or a passing satellite. It was something massive, something that could only be described as a fleet of ships, arranged in a perfect formation, approaching Earth at an unimaginable speed. Elara's heart pounded as she double-checked the coordinates and adjusted the magnification, but the result was the same, an entire armada. She immediately contacted her colleague, Dr. Harris, a renowned astrophysicist. "You need to see this," Elara said, her voice trembling with a mix of excitement and fear. Harris arrived at the observatory within minutes, his face filled with disbelief as he peered through the telescope. "This can't be real," he muttered. "These ships, they're not from any known nation on Earth." Elara's mind raced. Who, or what, could this be? She tapped rapidly on her computer, accessing international space observation networks. But no one else seemed to be reporting anything unusual. It was as if the world was unaware. The ships appeared to be enormous, their sleek, silver bodies glinting as they neared Earth's atmosphere. They didn't seem to be slowing down. Something was different about them. They weren't like anything humans had ever built. They had an eerie, otherworldly design. Some of the ships resembling enormous rings, while others were perfectly spherical, their surfaces glimmering with strange lights. It wasn't long before the rest of the world noticed. News outlets around the globe began broadcasting live footage of the fleet's arrival. Panic spread quickly, even as governments scrambled to assess the situation. But the ships didn't land with the chaos everyone expected. Instead, they hovered above Earth's atmosphere, still and unyielding. Within hours, the fleet initiated its first communication. The entire world watched as a booming voice echoed through every speaker, radio, and screen, the words translated into every language. "People of Earth," the voice declared, its tone calm and unhurried. "We come not to conquer, but to reveal the truth of your existence. Prepare yourselves." At first, there was confusion, then panic. The voice was cold, yet there was no immediate threat. No weapons, no demands. Just a strange, cryptic message that left the entire planet in a state of uneasy anticipation. As the hours passed, the fleet continued to hover, its lights shifting in a synchronized pattern. And yet, there was no sign of attack, no sign of hostility. The world was paralyzed, unsure of what was happening. Elara, still shaken from her earlier discovery, sat by her telescope, staring at the ships in silence. Her mind couldn't make sense of it. She had spent her life studying the stars, searching for signs of extraterrestrial life, but never had she imagined this moment, the arrival of something far beyond human comprehension. Then, the voice returned, even more unsettling this time. "We have already conquered you." The words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. Elara's blood ran cold. She glanced over at Dr. Harris, who was staring at the screen in stunned disbelief. The world had just been told that it had already been conquered. But how, and when? The fleet loomed above Earth, silent, as if waiting for something. The voice continued, "Many centuries ago, your world was ours. You were not aware of it, but you are no longer free. Your fate has long been sealed." Elara's hands trembled as she typed feverishly on her keyboard. She searched for any historical evidence, any hint that this revelation might be true. But nothing. No documentation. No mention of an alien conquest in humanity's past. It was as if the fleet's message came from a different reality altogether. "Who are you?" Elara whispered under her breath. But the voice did not respond to her thoughts. Instead, it simply stated, "This is only the beginning." The ships began to descend, breaking the silence with their presence. The world, gripped by uncertainty, watched as the first ship touched down on Earth's surface, far from where anyone expected, in the middle of an isolated desert. The landscape around it shimmered, the air warping, as though reality itself was bending under the weight of something vast and ancient. Elara's heart raced. She didn't know what this meant for the future, but one thing was clear: the world would never be the same again. The aliens had arrived, but their true purpose, and the history of their conquest, remained a mystery. And now, humanity would have to face the truth. The ships had touched down in the remote desert, far from any major city. It was as if they had chosen the location deliberately, isolated, quiet, and without any immediate human presence. But it wouldn't be long before the world would converge on this location. Governments, military forces, scientists, and journalists began to mobilize, preparing to descend on the area in an effort to make contact, to understand what was happening. The media buzzed with speculation, with theories flooding the airwaves. Was this the end of the world? Or was it the beginning of a new chapter for humanity? People took to social media, posting their own thoughts, their own fears. Some believed the aliens were benevolent, offering help, while others feared that this was the precursor to an invasion, that the aliens were preparing to subjugate humanity once and for all. In the quiet of her observatory, Elara remained glued to her screens. She couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment, as though the fate of the entire planet was hanging in the balance. The revelation that humanity had already been conquered centuries ago gnawed at her. The question echoed in her mind: how could something this massive, this fundamental, have been kept hidden for so long? The voice from the ships returned, calm and measured, as though it were speaking to an audience it had already known for millennia. "Do not be alarmed," the voice said. "We have no desire to cause harm. You have already been harmed. The conquest you were unaware of was not one of violence. It was never about domination through force. It was a conquest of the mind." Elara's brow furrowed. A conquest of the mind? How was that possible? She glanced back at Dr. Harris, who had been working alongside her, but he too seemed just as confused as she was. The mystery deepened with each passing second. The voice continued, its tone oddly soothing, almost as if it were trying to explain something that had been accepted for centuries. "The transformation of your world began long ago, long before your ancestors even realized they were being watched. We observed you, studied your societies, your behaviors, your patterns of thought. We understood that your greatest strength, your greatest vulnerability, lay in your minds. In your ability to create, to believe, to dream. We infiltrated your world quietly, without resistance, by becoming a part of it." Elara felt a chill run down her spine. It was like listening to a story about something that could never have happened, but somehow, it had. The voice paused for a moment, as if letting the weight of its words sink in, before it continued. "We did not come in ships of war or weapons of destruction. We did not need to. Your world was already ripe for our influence. We became a part of your culture, your religions, your governments. Over centuries, we shaped your history, guiding it toward a specific purpose. We subtly changed the course of events, nudging your civilization in a direction that would serve our goals. You never noticed because you were never meant to." The voice was almost patient, like a teacher explaining a lesson to a group of students who didn't quite understand. Elara felt a mix of disbelief and horror. The notion that the aliens had woven themselves into the very fabric of humanity's history, influencing it without detection, seemed impossible. And yet, everything the voice said felt terrifyingly logical. "Our influence began long before you had the technology to understand it. It was there in the first myths you created, the first religions you practiced. It was in your art, your literature, your philosophies. We placed ourselves within the legends you told each other, as gods, as prophets, as forces of nature. We gave your leaders the guidance they needed. We inspired the revolutions, the wars, the great achievements. You believed you were acting on your own, but it was us, always us, guiding your choices." Elara's heart raced as the implications of the voice's words sunk in. She thought back to the books she had read, the ancient texts that described gods descending from the heavens, and the strange occurrences that people throughout history had reported. Were these alien visitors? Had they been guiding humanity from the very beginning? The voice's next words only deepened her sense of unease. And now, after centuries of quiet influence, we are ready to reveal ourselves. We are no longer content to remain in the shadows, pulling the strings. It is time for you to know the truth. The Earth was never yours to begin with. You are not the masters of this planet, but merely its stewards. And your stewardship has always been under our watch. Elara stood up suddenly, her mind racing. Could it be true? Could the very history she had studied, the very civilization she had dedicated her life to understanding, have been an illusion, a carefully crafted story, controlled by these extraterrestrial beings? But as the voice spoke, Elara felt the strangest sensation, a creeping realization that there was more to this truth, something darker, more profound than she could even begin to grasp. We have given you everything, the voice said, its tone shifting slightly, as if hinting at something more ominous. Your greatest achievements, your greatest advancements, were never entirely your own. We shaped them. We made sure they would occur at the right time, in the right way. But now, the question remains. What will you do with this knowledge? Will you continue to live in ignorance, or will you accept your place in the grand design? The transmission ended with the voice's final words lingering in the air. This is your test, humans. The first of many. And then, silence. The world held its breath. Elara stood frozen in her observatory, staring out into the vast expanse of the desert where the alien ships waited. What was the next step? What did the aliens want from humanity now that the truth was laid bare? Was this really the end, or just the beginning of something far more dangerous? The answer, Elara knew, would come soon enough. But for now, the world was left to wrestle with the terrifying revelation. Humanity had been conquered long ago. And the true purpose of this conquest had yet to be fully revealed. The days that followed the broadcast from the alien fleet were a blur of frantic activity. Around the world, governments, military forces, and scientific organizations were scrambling to make sense of what had been revealed. People were no longer sure of what they could believe. Were their lives really their own, or had they been shaped by invisible hands for centuries? Had humanity's greatest achievements been nothing more than the result of an alien design? Elara and Dr. Harris found themselves at the forefront of the research, flooded with questions but few answers. They worked tirelessly in the days that followed, piecing together any available information, trying to understand the aliens' true purpose. But the silence from the fleet was deafening. It wasn't that the ships were gone. No, they still hovered above the desert, their lights shifting and pulsing in strange rhythms, but there was no further communication. No more messages, no instructions. The world was waiting. And then, one morning, Elara received an unexpected call. Dr. Winters, a voice on the other end said, "You need to come to the site." It's happening. Her pulse quickened. She knew exactly what it meant. Without a word, she gathered her things and left her observatory. Dr. Harris was already on his way to the desert, so Elara decided to join the convoy of scientists, military personnel, and journalists heading toward the alien fleet's landing site. The air around her seemed thick with anticipation, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next revelation. The convoy was met with a series of roadblocks and barriers. The military had set up an enormous perimeter around the area, limiting access to only a select few. But Elara's credentials as a scientist, along with her growing prominence in the media, allowed her to slip through the ranks. She was escorted to a viewing platform, along with a handful of other experts, high above the dusty desert floor, where the alien ships rested. The alien fleet's presence was overwhelming. It wasn't just the sheer size of the ships. It was the silence, the stillness of the scene. Despite their enormity, the ships didn't seem menacing. In fact, they exuded an eerie calm, as if they were waiting for something to unfold. Then, just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, the sky above the ships rippled. It was subtle at first, a faint distortion in the air, like the shimmering heat above a desert road, but it quickly intensified. The air shimmered with an unearthly energy, and from the core of the fleet, a beam of light shot down toward the Earth. It wasn't bright like a laser, but rather soft and pulsing, like a searchlight probing the depths of the land below. Elara's breath caught in her throat. Something was happening. The beam struck the desert floor, and a wave of light spread outward, illuminating a vast area. The ground trembled slightly, as though something deep beneath the earth was stirring. And then, like an enormous door unlocking, the landscape itself began to shift. Cracks appeared in the earth, and long-buried structures began to emerge, rising slowly from the sand. Elara's mind raced as she recognized the shapes. They were ancient, monumental structures, clearly not of human design. Pillars, statues, and vast walls began to rise, covered in symbols and markings that were unlike anything Elara had ever seen. They seemed to pulse with the same light emanating from the ships above, as though they were connected. "What is this?" Dr. Harris' voice came through her earpiece, full of awe and confusion. "I don't know," Elara whispered, her eyes wide. "But I think this is just the beginning." The structures continued to rise from the desert floor, some of them twisting and changing as they emerged. As they took shape, it became clear that they were not just buildings, they were something more. They seemed to be part of the earth itself, as though they had been waiting for centuries to be revealed. And then, from the largest structure, a door began to open. It was a massive archway, as tall as a skyscraper, and it slowly shifted, revealing a dark, cavernous interior. The world watched in stunned silence as the first alien figure stepped out from the archway. It was tall, easily twice the height of a human, and its form was both familiar and alien at the same time. It was humanoid, but its skin shimmered with a strange, translucent quality. Its face was smooth, almost featureless, with eyes that glowed with an otherworldly light. It didn't speak, but simply gazed out over the crowd, as though it were surveying the humans below. A shiver ran down Elara's spine. This was what humanity had been waiting for. The alien presence was no longer an abstract concept. It was here, and it was real. And then, just as quickly as the alien figure had emerged, it turned and walked back into the structure. The door slowly began to close behind it, and the light from the fleet above intensified. A new message filled the air, and this time, it wasn't a voice. The symbols from the ancient structures began to glow, and Elara's screen flickered with the same symbols, flashing rapidly in an intricate pattern. It was a language, one that no human had ever seen, but one that seemed to pulse with meaning. A moment passed, and then the symbols stopped, replaced by one simple message in English. "This is your test. Will you follow?" The silence that followed was deafening. The world seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the next step, for the next answer. Elara could hardly believe what she was seeing. The message was clear. The aliens had already shaped humanity's path, but now they were asking for something else. A choice. Would humanity follow their guidance? Or would they resist? Elara looked around at the faces of the other experts and officials gathered on the platform. No one spoke. No one moved. They were all waiting for the next sign, the next move from the alien fleet. But the aliens were waiting, too. And Elara knew that humanity was about to face its most critical decision. A decision that would shape the future of Earth, for better or for worse. The test had begun. The night that followed the alien's message was filled with a strange, suffocating tension. The world had been stunned by the events in the desert, but no one knew what to do next. The alien fleet still hovered above the Earth, silent and unmoving, and the structures in the desert remained, a ghostly monument to a past long buried. The symbols flashing across screens worldwide felt like a warning, but no one could decipher them, not yet. All the world could do was wait. Elara sat in her lab, unable to sleep, staring at the data she had gathered over the last few hours. The symbols, the structures, the glowing message that had appeared so suddenly. It was as if humanity had just been handed a puzzle, an impossible one. They didn't even know where to begin. What happens if we don't follow? Dr. Harris' voice crackled through her earpiece, dragging her out of her thoughts. Elara stared at the screen in front of her, her fingers poised above the keyboard, but her mind was far away. I don't know. I'm not sure we even know what following means. She sighed and leaned back in her chair. But the other option is to refuse, to resist. And if we do that, I'm not sure we can survive it. Maybe we don't have a choice, Harris said quietly. Maybe this is a test of something more fundamental. Not just obedience, but something deeper. Elara frowned, his words echoing in her mind. A test of something deeper. That thought stayed with her long after the conversation ended. She couldn't help but feel that the aliens were asking humanity to make a choice far more profound than they understood. This wasn't just about submission or compliance. This was about belief. The morning light began to seep through the windows of her observatory, but Elara felt no more clarity than she had the night before. Outside, the world was waking up to the same uncertainty. The air felt charged, as if the whole planet was waiting for something. The social media buzzed with arguments, some saying humanity should embrace the aliens, some demanding that Earth fight for its sovereignty. Elara had always been a scientist. She believed in evidence, in reason, in cold, hard facts. But this wasn't something that could be solved with reason alone. The world was caught between the desire for understanding and the need for autonomy. She had no answers, but there was one thing she knew for sure. Humanity needed to decide. That afternoon, an emergency summit was convened. Leaders, military officials, and scientists from around the world gathered at an undisclosed location, awaiting instructions. The United Nations had called for a unified response, but the more they spoke, the more it became clear that there was no consensus. Some leaders wanted to act quickly, either by launching a global defense against the fleet or by negotiating with the aliens directly. Others wanted to do nothing, waiting for more information, afraid to make a wrong move. And a few believed the aliens had already won. Resistance was futile. Elara had been invited to the summit as one of the few scientists who had communicated with the alien fleet directly, and her voice had already begun to take on a weight that made her uneasy. She wasn't a politician, she wasn't a leader, but she was becoming the center of attention in the debate. As the room filled with the most powerful figures on the planet, she took a deep breath and stood at the podium, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the microphone. "We need to understand," Elara began, her voice steady but raw with urgency. "The aliens have made it clear that they didn't come to conquer us in the way we feared. They didn't come with weapons or armies. Instead, they've been here for centuries, subtly shaping us, guiding our choices. They gave us knowledge, technology, religions. Our very histories may have been influenced by them." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. "But now," Elara continued, "they've put us at a crossroads. They've shown us that we've already been under their influence. And they've made one thing abundantly clear. We're being tested. The question is not about resistance or submission. It's about whether we can accept that truth." The silence in the room was palpable. Every eye was fixed on her, and she felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. This wasn't just about the future of Earth. It was about the future of humanity's identity. Could they accept that their history had not been their own? Could they accept that their greatest achievements had been carefully crafted by the hands of beings from another world? One of the political leaders at the table, a stoic woman from the European Union, spoke up. "You're asking us to trust them, to believe that everything we've ever done has been part of their design. How can we be sure they won't simply impose their will on us now, after all this time?" Elara turned to face her, the weight of the question heavy on her heart. "I can't guarantee that they won't. But I think the message they've given us is important. They didn't come to destroy us. They came to show us who we really are. And that is something we need to confront." Her words hung in the air. The room was divided. Some nodded in agreement, while others shook their heads in disbelief. The tension was almost unbearable. It was clear that some believed humanity could still assert control over its destiny, while others were beginning to wonder if it was all a lie. "I know it's difficult to accept," Elara said softly, almost to herself. But we're being offered a choice. To continue pretending that we are the sole authors of our story, or to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. A voice interrupted her train of thought, a voice that had been silent for most of the debate. A young military officer, one of the few who had not spoken up until now, stood slowly. His expression was unreadable, but his voice carried a quiet intensity. "If this is truly a test," he said, "then maybe the answer is not about following them, or rejecting them. Maybe the answer lies in choosing our own path, not to blindly follow what they want, but to make a decision for ourselves, free of their influence." Elara met his eyes, her mind racing. Was that the key? Could humanity find a way to stand independent, even after all this time under alien influence? The officer's words resonated deeply with her. Perhaps the test wasn't just about following, but about choosing freedom. The room fell into deep thought, as if the decision had become clear to them all. "Perhaps," Elara whispered, almost to herself, "that is the true test." For the first time since the aliens had arrived, Elara felt a spark of hope. Maybe this wasn't about surrender. Maybe humanity could still define its own fate. And maybe, just maybe, they had the power to choose. The days following the summit were nothing short of chaotic. News outlets across the world buzzed with coverage. Social media exploded with conflicting opinions, and the military's presence around the alien fleet intensified. Governments were paralyzed by indecision. It seemed like the world had fractured into two sides. Those who believed humanity should embrace the aliens and accept the truth of their manipulation, and those who felt betrayed, determined to fight back against an invisible enemy that had been shaping their history for centuries. Elara sat in her office, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. Her once clear and focused mind now swirled with doubt. Could humanity truly free itself from the grip of the aliens? Were the aliens really as benevolent as they claimed? Or was this a carefully orchestrated manipulation to bring Earth into submission? And if Earth chose to resist, if they rejected the choice they'd been given, what would the consequences be? The phone on her desk rang, pulling her out of her spiraling thoughts. She picked it up, half expecting another frantic call from Dr. Harris, but it was someone else, a military contact, someone she barely knew. "Elara, we need you at the site. Now." The voice on the other end was urgent. "The situation has escalated." Her heart leapt into her throat. "What's happening?" It's the resistance. There's been an attack. A group of extremists is trying to breach the fleet's perimeter. They're making a move." Elara's pulse quickened. The military had been trying to keep any form of resistance in check, but she had feared that someone would take matters into their own hands. Fear and anger had been building for weeks, and it seemed like the pressure had finally boiled over. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, she said quickly, hanging up the phone. She grabbed her coat and headed toward the transport vehicles waiting outside. The desert felt far too quiet, the tension in the air palpable, as if the world was on the edge of something momentous. The military convoy was moving quickly, and Elara joined them, her mind racing with thoughts of what she would find at the site. As they approached the perimeter, the lights of military vehicles flashed across the barren desert landscape. Elara's eyes scanned the horizon, where the alien ships still hovered, unmoving, like silent sentinels. But there, just beyond the military barricades, smoke rose into the sky. She was ushered out of the vehicle and into a command tent, where officers were huddled around a series of monitors, tracking the movement of the extremists. The situation was dire. A group of rogue soldiers, combined with civilians from the growing resistance movements, had launched an assault on the fleet's perimeter in an effort to force the aliens to reveal their true intentions. Some of them had crossed over the defensive lines, attempting to breach the structures the aliens had revealed, and now, a standoff had begun. "What are the aliens doing?" Elara asked, her voice tense. "Nothing," came the response from one of the military commanders. "They've not made a move. It's as if they're just watching." The implication was chilling. The aliens had shown no intention of intervening, and that terrified Elara. Were they truly passive, or was this all part of their plan, to let humanity tear itself apart, to see how far the world was willing to go before it crumbled. Elara's stomach churned. This wasn't just about humans versus aliens anymore. This was about something far more dangerous: humanity's own fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of the truth, and fear of the loss of autonomy. A loud explosion echoed in the distance, shaking the ground beneath her feet. The tension in the air turned into something more physical, something that felt like it was about to rupture. Elara grabbed the nearest officer, trying to keep her focus. "We can't let this escalate further. This has to end before it gets worse. We need to talk to the aliens." The officer stared at her, his face hard with determination. "What do you suggest, Dr. Winters? The people won't listen to anyone at this point. The world is breaking apart. We can't control them, but we can still control ourselves," Elara said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "If we give in to our fear, if we let the extremists win, then they already lost. We need to show the aliens and the world that humanity can make a choice, one that doesn't spiral into destruction." There was a long silence, but the officer nodded slowly. He understood. "I'll see what we can do to organize a meeting. But you need to hurry." Elara didn't wait for further instructions. She rushed toward the command center where military leaders and international officials were preparing for what was next. As she stepped inside, her heart pounded in her chest. She knew that the next few hours could decide everything. "I'm here to speak with the aliens," Elara said, her voice firm and unwavering. A murmur spread through the room. The world's most powerful leaders looked at her like she was both mad and brilliant. But it was clear that no one else had a better idea. One of the generals approached her. "Are you sure about this, Dr. Winters? After everything that's happened?" "I have to be," Elara replied. "Humanity cannot survive if it loses its will to choose. I want to show them we can still make decisions that are ours. Not theirs, ours." The aliens had already given humanity a test. They had shown humanity the truth. Now, it was time for humanity to show what it was truly capable of. The test wasn't about whether they'd submit or resist. The real test was whether they could choose something better. Minutes later, Elara was escorted to the communication station. She stood before the vast array of equipment, her mind racing with the enormity of the situation. As the transmission began, she felt a cold sweat forming on the back of her neck. The massive alien ships loomed above, waiting. They were silent, inscrutable, like ancient gods watching from the heavens. Her fingers hovered over the microphone. "This is Dr. Elara Winters," she began, her voice steady but firm. "We are not your puppets. We are not your pawns. We will not bow to you because we are afraid, and we will not fight you simply because we don't understand. We are humanity. We have lived, we have fought, we have loved, and we have created. We do not know what your intentions are, but we know that we are capable of something more than this fear." Elara took a breath, her words carrying the weight of humanity's future. "We choose to make our own path. We choose to believe in our own capacity for growth and change. We choose to stand together, not in fear, but in hope." The silence that followed felt unbearable, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. And then, from the depths of the alien ships, a single word echoed across the communication system. Very well. The test had begun, and humanity was ready to prove that it could decide its own future. But the true consequences of that choice, whatever they might be, were still waiting. The next few hours after Elara's broadcast passed in a haze of confusion, disbelief, and hope. The alien response had been brief, yet it was enough to send ripples across the globe. Very well. That was all they had said. No promises, no threats, just those two words. But what did it mean? Was it a victory, or just another part of their plan? Humanity was unsure. Some celebrated as if it were a triumph, believing that their defiance had earned the aliens' respect. Others felt a gnawing unease. The aliens were still watching, still waiting, and the looming question remained: what would be the cost of this freedom? Elara couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was just the beginning. The world was caught in a fragile equilibrium. a delicate balance between hope and fear. The resistance groups had largely fallen silent, but it was only a matter of time before they rallied again, demanding more action, more control. On the other hand, governments and military leaders were still on edge, uncertain of their next step. She spent the next days working with scientists, trying to decode the alien messages and learn more about their technology. The symbols that had once seemed so impenetrable now appeared to be something of a key, a way to communicate, to access a deeper understanding of the aliens' purpose. But what it all meant, she wasn't yet sure. One night, as Elara reviewed data on the glowing structures in the desert, a new transmission came through. The message was stark and simple, but it sent chills down her spine. "We are not alone." The alien fleet had spoken again, and this time, their message was unmistakable. Humanity had been part of something far larger than they could ever have imagined. They were not the only intelligent life in the galaxy. The aliens had simply been the first to reveal themselves to Earth. Elara stared at the screen, feeling the weight of that truth sink in. This revelation, this admission, shifted everything. The aliens had not come to conquer Earth, but to show humanity its place in a vast, interconnected universe. Earth was not isolated, not a singular anomaly in the cosmos. It was one piece in a far-reaching network of life, and the implications were staggering. In a quiet meeting with Dr. Harris, she voiced her concerns. "We've been so focused on the idea that humanity was either under their control or at war with them. But what if that's not the issue at all? What if the aliens are trying to reveal something more profound? Something about our place in the universe?" Harris nodded, but his face was grim. "The implications are overwhelming. If there are other civilizations out there, other species, what does that mean for us? How do we fit into the galactic community?" Elara took a deep breath, trying to process everything. The idea of a galactic community seemed both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Humanity had always believed it was alone in the universe, that Earth was the pinnacle of existence. But now, it seemed like that belief was shattering, replaced by an uncomfortable truth. Humanity was just one small part of a much greater, much more complicated web of life. And then, as if the universe were taunting them, the next alien message appeared. "Your test has begun. Prepare to face your judgment." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Judgment. What did it mean? Elara felt her stomach twist. Had they been given the opportunity to choose, only to be judged for their decision? Or was this something more sinister? Something that humanity could not possibly understand? Desperation began to claw at her as she thought back to the day of the first encounter, when the fleet had arrived. They had promised that humanity was already being tested. Had that test been part of something larger? And now, judgment loomed. What would that judgment look like? How would humanity be judged? In the days that followed, rumors spread across the world like wildfire. People claimed to have seen strange lights in the sky, far more vivid and unsettling than the normal activity from the alien ships. Others reported hearing bizarre sounds, as if the air itself were vibrating with an alien frequency. Governments were on high alert, but the alien fleet remained silent, hovering over the desert, unyielding, ominous. Then came the day when the skies above Earth darkened. The once serene, peaceful quiet of the alien presence was replaced by an intense energy that sent ripples across the atmosphere. The fleets above Earth began to move, not in the slow, deliberate manner they had before, but suddenly, with purpose. Elara and Dr. Harris were in the desert once more, observing the alien ships from a vantage point high above the sand. Something was happening. The air felt thick with tension, and she could see the military and scientific teams preparing for something they didn't understand. A massive shape appeared in the sky, a ship unlike any they had seen before. It was enormous, dwarfing the other ships, and it hovered above the desert, casting a shadow that stretched across miles of land. For the first time since the aliens had arrived, Elara felt an overwhelming sense of dread. There was no mistaking it now. This was no longer just a test of humanity's will. The aliens had come to pass judgment. The massive ship descended slowly, and the air itself seemed to crackle with energy. Then, it stopped, hovering just above the ground. Silence. A voice reverberated through the air. It was not a human voice, nor was it spoken in any language they could understand. It was an alien language, but it was different from the symbols they had seen before. This was something more primal, something more profound. And then, as if the ship had made its decision, the ground beneath Elara's feet trembled. A wave of energy shot out from the ship, spreading across the land in every direction. It wasn't destructive, not in the way they had expected. There were no explosions, no sudden bursts of fire. Instead, the wave seemed to seep into the earth, into the very fabric of reality itself. It was as if the aliens were reaching into the core of the planet, probing the deepest parts of human history, of human consciousness. The wave passed over Elara, and she felt it, felt the weight of centuries of history, the burden of choices made long before her birth. It was as if she were being pulled into the very soul of Earth, forced to see the entirety of humanity's existence in one breath. And then, it was over. The alien ship hovered silently, and the voice returned, now speaking in perfect English. Your judgment is complete. The future of humanity is not one of submission or rebellion. It is one of understanding. Do you accept the path of unity? The question echoed in Elara's mind. She knew this was no longer just about survival. It was about something more profound, a choice. But was humanity ready? Would they embrace unity, or would they let fear and pride tear them apart? The test had reached its breaking point. The question was simple. Could humanity step forward into the unknown, or would they falter in the face of their own doubt? And so, with that question hanging in the air, the future of Earth hung in the balance. Elara's heart pounded. The answer was about to come, not from the aliens, but from humanity itself. The weeks following the alien judgment were the longest Elara had ever experienced. The world was in chaos. No one could deny it now. Humanity was at a crossroads. The aliens had shown them their place in the universe, revealed the truth about their history, and given them a choice that seemed both liberating and terrifying. Unity or division, acceptance or resistance. Everywhere Elara went, people were talking, arguing, debating, questioning. Scientists, politicians, philosophers, even ordinary citizens were grappling with what the aliens had revealed. Could they truly accept the idea that humanity was not the center of the universe? That their greatest achievements, their religions, their cultures, might have been influenced or even guided by forces beyond their comprehension? And what did it mean that they had been given the opportunity to choose their future? One that was not bound by fear, but by understanding. The alien message, transmitted globally, had been clear. Do you accept the path of unity? But no one knew what that path would look like. No one knew what kind of future humanity was being asked to embrace. Would it mean surrendering their autonomy, merging with alien civilizations, giving up their individuality for the sake of something greater? Or would it mean continuing to struggle for control, for sovereignty, even at the risk of isolation? Elara, too, was torn. As a scientist, she had always prided herself on logic and reason. But this was no longer about facts or evidence. It was about something far more personal. The alien fleet had already shown their power, had already altered the fabric of the world's politics and societies. They had put humanity in the driver's seat, but they were also holding up a mirror that reflected not just humanity's strengths, but also its flaws. She found herself walking through the desert again, the winds howling as she approached the alien site. The massive ship still hovered above, silent and unyielding. It had been weeks since the alien wave had passed over the Earth, and yet the atmosphere was still charged, as if something was waiting to happen, something that humanity would either accept or refuse. She met with Dr. Harris once more, a man she had come to trust deeply throughout this process. His face was etched with exhaustion, his eyes tired from the constant stress of deciphering alien transmissions and the growing political unrest that had come with their arrival. "We can't wait forever, Elara," Harris said, his voice tight. "The world is on the edge of a breakdown." The extremists are gaining strength, and some governments are on the verge of declaring open war with the aliens. You know the military can't keep controlling the situation for long." Elara nodded, knowing the truth of his words. The pressure was mounting. The aliens had given them a chance, a choice, but if humanity couldn't come together, if they couldn't unite and make a decision, there was no telling what would happen next. Would the aliens intervene? Would they take away humanity's ability to choose? Or would they simply leave, leaving Earth to tear itself apart? The tension was unbearable. The world was divided, and Elara couldn't help but wonder if the aliens had already accounted for humanity's fear, its tendency to divide and conquer. They had given humanity the ultimate test, a test of unity. She walked closer to the glowing alien structures in the desert. The symbols on the walls shimmered with a faint, ethereal light, and she felt a strange pull, an almost magnetic attraction toward them. The message they had received had been clear. The future of humanity depended on their ability to see beyond themselves, to understand that they were part of something much bigger. But could humanity accept that? Could they accept their place in the cosmos? She stood before one of the alien structures, her hand hovering over the intricate symbols. Something inside her stirred, a deep, almost visceral understanding. It wasn't about submission or dominance. It was about connection. Humanity was being asked to connect, not just with the aliens, but with each other, with the entire universe. But that required something most people were afraid to give up: pride. Her mind returned to the first message the aliens had sent. It was as if the aliens had known that humanity would resist, that fear would drive them to fight back against the very thing that could help them grow. Your judgment is complete. The future of humanity is not one of submission or rebellion. It is one of understanding. But how could humans understand something they had never been taught? How could they bridge the gap between what they had known, what they had always believed, and the truth that was being offered? She felt a tremor beneath her feet. The ground shuddered, and for a moment, Elara thought the desert itself was moving, shifting, perhaps opening up some ancient door to the unknown. But then, she realized it wasn't the land, it was the aliens. They were responding, as they always had. The ships above were adjusting, aligning. They were waiting. And then, a voice, not through the air, but inside her mind, a soft, deep voice that she had come to recognize. It was the voice of the aliens, yes, but it was more than that. It was a presence. "Do you understand, Dr. Winters?" Elara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the question. She had spent so much of her life seeking answers through science, through reason. But now, as the alien's presence enveloped her, she understood something deeper. Something that could not be explained in formulas or equations. "I think I do," she whispered. "Then, you must help them understand." Her heart raced. This was the moment that humanity had been waiting for. It wasn't about her, or any one individual, it was about the entire species. It was about helping them see beyond their own fears, beyond their pride. To embrace the idea that they were not alone, that the universe was vast and full of life, and that they had a role to play within it. But the choice would not be easy. And time was running out. Elara returned to the command center, her resolve hardening. She had made her decision. It was time to call on the world's leaders, the scientists, the people. The choice was theirs, and it had to be made, together. She knew that if they failed, if humanity couldn't unite, the consequences could be catastrophic. The broadcast went out, just as it had before. But this time, her voice was different. It was calm, but there was strength in it. A quiet determination that she had found in herself and, she hoped, in humanity. "We are at the crossroads of our future," Elara said. "The aliens are not our enemies. They have not come to conquer us. They have come to show us that we are not alone. The choice is ours. To reject this opportunity, or to embrace the path of unity. We must choose, not as individuals, but as one species, one planet. The future of humanity depends on whether we can come together, whether we can see beyond ourselves, beyond our differences." She paused, her heart beating heavily in her chest. "We can no longer afford to be divided. The time for division is over. We must choose unity, for if we do not, the universe will pass us by." The silence that followed was deafening. And then, in the distance, the first faint glow appeared in the sky. The ships, slowly shifting, moving together in alignment. The decision was being made, but humanity's future, whether bright or dim, rested in their hands. Elara held her breath. The test was over. The choice was now theirs.